Welcome to this presentation of the Rotary Club of North Bethesda, Maryland, USA. Our club was established in 1974. We meet every Friday morning at 7:45 a.m., and we often invite guest speakers to give presentations on all kinds of interesting subjects. Please contact us through our website at nbrotary.org. And thanks for watching. Our speaker today is our own Rotary Club member, Linda Berg-Cross. Linda is a professor of psychology at Howard University and has a private practice in Potomac, Maryland. She will be speaking to us about adverse childhood events and their impacts.
So I thought what I would talk about today is one of my favorite and I think important topics in psychology, which is ACEs, which stands for Adverse Childhood Events, and is a major area of study. And it is big data in that the results I'm going to tell you about, or the findings that we know, have been done on hundreds of thousands of children and looking at them longitudinally. This isn't like a one study deal. Anyhow, here are the children I'm most focused on in my life. These are my grandchildren, my 4 grandchildren. And when we look at our grandchildren, we want everything in the world good to happen to them. We don't want bad things to happen to them. But we all know that life has good and bad, and that people have adverse events. So there's normally 2 philosophies. One philosophy, of course, is, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But we're not all John McCain. And at the end, I'm going to talk about how we can make John McCains out of us. But basically, for most of us, what doesn't kill us makes us broken. And I'm going to hopefully show you that in data. So there's 4 parts. I'll try to do it real quick so we have time. What are ACEs? How do they affect development? What's their effect on our health, psychological and physical? And can we have post-traumatic growth instead of post-traumatic trauma? How can we make the bad things that happen to us a source of resiliency? And most important, not most important, but it is interesting, the research showing the economic savings that we have now if we invest in post-traumatic growth. So when I use the term ACEs, all of these terms you see on the screen, they can stand in, they can be synonyms, all right? Some people call it post-traumatic stress, toxic stress, childhood stress, but in the field we call them ACEs, and that's where the research focus is. And the main focus of this talk is that when you see somebody who has psychological issues or physical issues that you feel that they are partly responsible for, instead of asking what's wrong with you, we need to ask what happened to you. And that is the difference, I guess, between our normal judgmental propensity, which we all have, and sort of a psychological scientific output. Because we now know that a lot of times the real question is what happened to you and not what's wrong with you. So how do we best assess ACEs? I'm going to show you a list of ACEs that have been used in research, and most of the research findings I'm going to tell you about have used that. But the current generation of researchers have expanded. Now we're looking at, well, the original list people came up with, there's a lot of other stressful things that happen. And so people are looking at different ages when bad things happen to you, the type of events they are, how severe it is. You could be in a car accident, it could be a bumper, or it could be life-changing. And then, of course, are these effects additive or multiplicative? And there I have some data that I'll show you later. So all of this started about 22, 23 years ago with the Kaiser Permanente study. Once we went to health maintenance organizations, and Kaiser is the largest, they were the leaders in having medical records online. And so we have a lot of data, and these are the original ACEs, the original adverse events that we know have lasting effects on people. if someone in your family, and this is the percentages, is just showing you the number of people who have that, the number of people in your family who are on drugs or have a substance abuse problem, if there is sexual abuse, if your caregiver has mental illness, if you've seen violence against your mother, if you've been psychologically abused, which is one of my main areas of research, if you've been physically abused, and if there's a family member incarcerated. So these are really very dramatic. And here you can see that roughly the percentage of the population that is exposed to these, men, women in total. And if we look at the abuse, the physical and sexual abuse, and combine those two, it's a quarter of children are exposed to this. All right, so here we get to where the research starts getting very interesting. The question is, what is the cumulative effect? So a third of the people, you get a normal curve. A third of the people are really lucky. You grow up without any ACEs, all right? I grew up without any ACEs. I had a very charmed childhood, all right? And a third of us do. We really don't point to any horrific things that happen. But there are people who have 1, 2, 3, and 4 and more ACEs. And unfortunately, more than 10% of the population has 4 or more ACEs. And of course, in the current research, where we start looking at different types of ACEs, and if we expand it, you get, of course, more of the population, because you're looking at more types of traumatic events. All right. So here we're talking about the percent of people with health problems. This includes, as we'll see, physical health and mental health. And one of the things people are surprised to know is how much our physical health is impacted by the psychological trauma that we experience in life. And that line, you don't have to have any statistics. You can see the more ACEs you have, the worse your health. This is a very, very famous and powerful graph that's been replicated again and again and again. There is no doubt the more adverse events you have as a child, your health will be compromised, not just your mental health, but your physical health. So look at this. If you have 6 or more ACEs, your average life expectancy is 60. If you have 0 ACEs, your life expectancy is 80. There is a health disparity that we should pay attention to. And if you see where the difference in this life expectancy comes from, you can see in the yellow, that's, well, that's the age. But if we look at the economic toll, you can see that most of the economic toll comes from productivity loss, and we'll be talking about this more. The lifetime cost, what it's costing our society, is 124 billion, but I don't know if that is in what time period. So let's skip that number. But if you look, you can see that healthcare is a big chunk. That's that very light green. Then special education. And the last thing is criminal justice. That's just one column. But it's very costly to the society. And of course, the health disparity is staggering. The only one that has that big a health disparity is severe mental illness. They lose 24 years of life compared to somebody who's mentally healthy. All right, so how do ACEs cause all this damage? I'm just going to give you this in 90 seconds. This is a very famous pyramid. It's called the ACE pyramid. You start off with these bad things happening to you, and I'll show you on the next slide. This does, when bad things happen to us because of the way our genes are and the way our hormones are, it can disrupt the development of our brain in every part of our body. That ends up having social and emotional effects on us, which leads us in many cases to adopt high-risk behaviors, either because we're in pain or we're impulsive or we don't have the right cognitive skills, which leads to disease, disability, and social problems, and then early death. So let's just spend 1 minute on what's happening. This is a different way of showing those. And I'm going to talk for a minute on the neurobiological effects, because I think people don't realize what is happening inside our bodies when bad things happen to us, and how, particularly with children, it affects the development of the brain and our stress hormones. So all you have to know from this thing on the brain is we have 3 main parts. The prefrontal cortex, that's where we think. The hippocampus, that's where we remember. And the amygdala, which is where we feel anxiety. And that when you're stressed, if you look at the yellow under each, so if you look at the amygdala, when we're stressed, our anxiety center grows, physically grows, all right? We have increased volume, increased activity. The neurons are super active. They learn how to always give us that fight or flight reaction. If you look at what happens, though, to our memory center, we see shrinking neurons. We see less synapses. We see less neural activity. And of course, in our thinking, the shrinking of the dendrites, the dendrites are those things that actually move the message in our brain from one neuron to the next. So if they shrink, our transmission is not that good. All right. So basically, we end up with brain dysfunction when we have trauma. And here are possible, just a list of them. We end up with smaller brain size, less neural connections, decreased myelination. Myelination is like the superhighway. Is the road easy to travel on or bumpy? We have increased cortisol and things like that. I should also say, and again, in 20 seconds, that when we have these neurobiological changes in us, we have epigenetic changes, meaning certain hormones are turned on and certain genes are turned on and certain genes are turned off in utero. And this is why troubled people have troubled children, in part, because you pass on the software, okay? We all have genes, that's our hardware, but the software is what genes are being turned on and off, how we are programmed. And it turns out, lots of data, I'd love to give a talk on this one time, that we pass this on to our children, which is why you want everyone to be happy when they're pregnant and relaxed. All right, so let's first look at the data here then on what is the relationship between ACEs and mental health. And hold on, I have to move my own, I want to get this out of the way. Right, so you can see with increasing ACEs, and the blue to the right, of course, is 4 or more ACEs, mood disorders, which is depression, increases with your ACEs. The anxiety disorders really increase, right? Because we know that amygdala is growing. Substance abuse, look at how substance abuse increases with ACEs, and impulse control disorders. All right, so these are the mental health things. Now let's look at chronic disease. And you can see with increasing ACEs, heart disease increases, not that much, but it's statistically significant. Stroke increases. COPD really increases, diabetes increases, and sexually transmitted disease, because of the impulsive behaviors, really increases. But all of these are statistically significant, right? So if you look at this in terms of risk ratios, you're 2.2 times likely to have ischemic heart disease, 2.4 times is likely to have a stroke. This is if you have 4 or more ACEs. 1.9 times is likely to have cancer, so almost twice as likely to get cancer, and 1.5 times is likely to have diabetes. So again, the physical health consequences, chronic disease consequences, are very clear and very easy to see. Yeah. Now, this will start getting into some of the economics involved in this. Look at absenteeism in the workplace as a function of ACEs. Can you see how that goes up? Like steps, dot, 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 dot. Look at financial problems with increasing ACEs and job problems. Right? So again and again, almost anything you look at, you can find that if you've had these problems as a child, and normally these looking at the ACEs, they go up to about age 14, 15, and then they're looking at really 16 to 25 or 16 to 30 for the problems. So these things that are happening to you in your childhood, it's not that it's necessarily going to make you stronger. What we see is, as a society, and this turns out it is universal pretty much in terms of Europe, South America, that the more stress we have, the more compromised we become as human beings, that we need to be protected when bad things happen to us. So here's our social dysfunction. We end up with lower education and occupational attainment. You'll see in a minute how much social service it is costing us as a society. You have this increased medical costs because you're more prone to all these chronic medical problems. We know the shortened lifespan, I've pointed out. You're at increased risk for all the STDs, teen pregnancy, maternal depression, and of course that intergenerational transmission because of epigenetics.
From what you
yes.
said up to this point. I look at the two extremes of what you had there, the people with no ACEs versus the people with the maximum number of ACEs. And I look at that and I say, well, taking the polarized negative of what you're saying, I look at the people with no ACEs and think, well, this must be dealing with the underlying hardware, the genetics, so to speak, that the people are, the people who have some of the issues that you're talking about, even though they have no ACEs, they still develop these issues.
That's right. There are other things that happen, but of course, if you have 0 ACEs, you tend to be quite mentally and physically healthy.
No, but I'm saying that, but the people with 0 ACEs there are still some who have issues, obviously.
They are, but most of these are showing starting with 1 ACE. And that's why the new generation of researchers, Steve, which are looking at other types of ACEs, again, all this research, hundreds, thousands of studies are based on basically 9 things that are happening to you. But we're finding that as you look at more of these things, but of course, other things, I agree with you, and we're going to get to that, can create these issues. It is not solely ACEs.
The other part on a more positive note is the people with all of these ACEs that you've identified, it's still like what, that's like 20% or something like that who have issues and problems. To me, that shows that that the majority of people actually overcome those ACEs and do not suffer the consequences of those ACEs.
Well, it turns out more than half. That's right. Many people, and you'll see why in a minute. All right, because I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
So this just shows you that when things happen, why is it the more things happen to you, the worse it is? And it's because it's not additive, it's more than additive. So here's somebody, sexual abuse, here's your risk, domestic violence, but if you put it together, you can see in purple the increased risk due to the synergy of those two.
Assuming these studies have all the controlling confounders have been controlled, am I correct?
Yes. These
so
are
otherwise, in looking just alone, those 4 ACEs or beyond is not going to make a difference, because if they're not, there are so many confounders in these kind of studies, and if they're not controlled, the data becomes meaningless.
Right. That's why it is big data with lots of government study. I mean, these are all NIH, NSF studies, and they're huge. All right. So that this one's looking at 2,400 people. When I was in graduate school, we would look at 24. Now we're looking at 2,400 people in any one study. And again, there are multiple studies. It is I never come across, of course, none of us come across studies that don't show significant results, but it is very rare for people in this area to ever come across that. It's
So
very
when you
robust
talk about the
finding.
individual stressors or individual ACEs, are you looking at the odds ratio beyond one, or
Yes,
just a
yeah.
little significant?
So here's the odds ratio. It's funny you would mention that, all right?
Yeah.
Correcting for potential confounders, researchers found an increased risk between traffic-related air pollution and asthma, okay? Solely among children exposed to violence. So in other words, if you're not exposed to violence, somehow your body is better able to protect you. All right. Now, here's the lifetime cost for, this was 2014, so 8 years ago, for first time reported maltreatment victims. So this is child abuse, first time reporting of child abuse. If we look at what it cost our country for the children in 2014 who came to social services over their lifetimes, $6 trillion. Just for that one.
This is the United States data, or you're looking at
only US, only US, this data. Okay. All right. What does it cost to do nothing? And you can see that, again, this is from the economic analyses that were done in 2014, would basically cost us $2 million for each child who's maltreated in this country, who does not get treatment. And then you'll see what happens to the economics when we do treat the people. And you can see for the different ones here. All right. What works to prevent this? So that's getting to the thing, how can we make us all John McCain's? What can we do that we have post-traumatic growth, that the people are, that 40-45% who have 5 or more ACEs and nothing bad happens to them? What's the difference between them and these statistically vulnerable people, which is a big group? So it turns out there's 6 big things. The first 2 are more internal, and we'll talk about how you get those maybe if we have time. Social capital, which is your basic belief that the world is good, will take care of you, you could trust people. It's what I call your attachment capacity. And then your resilience. Can you self-regulate? Can you have hope for your own life? You might have given up on everybody else, but do you believe you can control your own destiny? All right. And of course, we can help develop these things, although some might say some of us are born with more of this capacity. Clearly, being a privileged person gives you that, because you're growing. That's the definition of privilege. Privilege means you grow up trusting in the world because the world is good to you. But here are the 4 things that we can do and why Rotary supports these types of things. Family support, peer support, community support, and school support. So essentially, if we're out in the world and each layer of our social niche acknowledges that something terrible happened to us and is helping us deal with it or overcome it, even by being kind and helpful to us, that ends up, as we'll see, having a big impact. All right, and then I'm just going to skip this so we have time to talk. And I want to show you more. We know what these are. All right, so here's a very National Child Trauma Center showing kids that were treated and the number of behavioral problems. The blue is the kids who didn't get treated, 45%. No, this one is 41% have problems, right? Who have had some type of abuse, compared to, you can go down to about 13% of those who are treated. Same thing with PTSD. You don't have to have PTSD if something terrible happens to you. You can have these 5 things happen. You could be resilient. You could have your friends sleep over and hug you and tell you it's going to be okay, and you'll be better. And just traumatic stress, you can see that if you're treated, you don't have traumatic stress. Now, if we look at, well, why doesn't the society invest in these things? Why do people look at this as frivolous or do your own thing? So here's the thresholds needed for legislation and regulation. The first one, the upper left hand, is secondhand smoke and lung cancer. So that you're not allowed to smoke in a restaurant now because you might give me lung cancer. And no one loved to smoke as a teenager more than me. That was hard to give up, all right? But you can see it's a very low odds ratio compared to drug addiction and sexual abuse, where the odds ratio is quite high between sexual abuse and getting cancer and drug addiction and exposure to sexual abuse. And the first one is females, the second one is males, all right? We don't let people text and drive, but we can see that the odds ratios are bigger for people with PTSD and physical abuse, all right? And all of this is to show that while we're, as a society, and because it's harder to understand, we do make legislation, we do help, for instance, lead exposure, which we've talked about and we all agree. This is, you have a very high likelihood of becoming hyperactive and having ADHD if you have lead exposure. But look at the relationship between having ADHD and having domestic violence. And it is almost twice as much. And again, this not only affects the lives of the people who have these things happen, but their family members, their ability to parent, and the economic cost to our society. And here's communities that care. This is a big SAMSHA study that it's also a model of how the young people are doing research. There's a lot of research now on post-traumatic growth, taking bad things and knowing the types of intervention that are going to help people be spiritually stronger, personally stronger, better able to relate instead of more impulsive, appreciate life and new possibilities, because, that is the John McCain phenomena. I mean, we look at someone like that, and he was a living example of post-traumatic growth, right? And we all would like to be that and to help other people be that. But if you look at John McCain, he did have all those 5 factors going for him. He wasn't alone in his thing. And so again, when we see somebody, I would urge you not to ask them what's wrong with them, but to ask what happened to you. And so now I would like to invite discussion on do you think resiliency is, it's just how we are, we're lucky? Can we increase that sense of self-efficacy? Should the society, I didn't go over a lot of the other economic data showing how much we could save as a society in different areas. In employment alone, having people be productive citizens, that alone is the most convincing thing, because the work histories of people with untreated ACEs is dismal. This is, so anyhow, let me stop talking. I'll just show some of these. These are things I took out. I'll open it up for discussion now. Thank you.
So Linda, I have
great presentation.
Great presentation. A couple of questions I have, okay?
Yeah.
One, you never touched upon. First thing, you always focus on the data from this country. That's number one.
Yeah.
For good reasons. The second is you did not say anything about demographic or ethnic differences, that because there are more stresses in the socioeconomically poor people compared socioeconomically, people who are at disadvantage have more stressors. And so that kind of data, I haven't seen it.
Okay, wait, Bob. I want to hear the third, but let me speak to the second.
Okay.
Because this is, poor people have more ACEs profoundly, but rich people have ACEs too.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
okay, I understand.
And the research has been done all over Europe, all over South America. You find this. All right. whether like in India, I know there are researchers doing ACEs in India, but I don't know that the South Asian data. But again, this is very universal.
Okay.
So even within a very, now again, I don't know what happens, if you have, we know it happens in the Nordic countries, enormous research. So even where there's government support, if you're not getting it, your ACEs show up, or if your peers are non-supportive. But go ahead, what's your third? Because these are excellent.
Well, third, I think you touched upon the intergenerational, what I call the imprinting effect, that happens with several, both the genetic and the environmental factors contributing to the imprinting. That is what happens in the early life, that is including into the embryo, in the fetal stage, has a tremendous imprinting effect, showing some of these effects later in life. So what my question has to be, are those kind of factors into considered when you're talking epigenetics, which I know a lot about epigenetics. So the question is, are they looking at the genetic versus the non-genetic causes of these different ACEs and imprinting and expression of those issues in the later life?
Yes, these are the new researchers. In fact, I was talking to a doctoral student the other day who is the first person I know who has shown that the stress levels in the mother are predicting the genetic markers in the adolescence of their ability to attach.
Exactly. That's the part I was getting at. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So these are all, because of course, we didn't have the way of looking at the genetics even 10 years ago. Now graduate students, if they're in good institutions, have access to that, that type. At Howard, we can't do that. But there are, if you're in a big institution, and that's going to be very exciting to follow that through, these epigenetic changes, because it shows that it takes generations to create a change.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, actually, I have a comment, of course, not anything related to psychology. It's a great presentation, and I think impacts many. The economic disparity is an important factor, but I think also based on my sample children in this, they all grew up in Churchill School District, and I see that now that they're opening up their 30s, they say, "Oh, Dad, that's what happened in the school." So I think if we can, so what happened is, because we were kind of restrictive, thrifty family, and they'd go to this very affluent sample of students, and they would see they're wearing, my children are wearing less than $25 shoes, and the other guys are $150 shoes, and they'd be teased up on our, told things. And it seems that now they are opening it up, that they had imprints or some significant amount of distress caused as a matter of fact of that, although they didn't tell us at that point, because thinking that, hey, that's just our family standard and keep on doing that. Just based on that, as I attended many, the meetings with the head principal and so on, I think the education institutions from the onset at the children's level can impact some of those distresses to be alleviated, like
Absolutely.
some sort of discipline. For example, I'm a big on school uniform, and Dr. Bands of Churchill, she would say, I raised 2 hands for it, but none of the parents raised any hand, and I was the loner. So because that causes so much.
Raising a hand for what?
School uniform. For
school uniform, right?
School uniform, because that gives a feeling of equality or some kind of discipline as the children are growing up from the pre-kindergarten to the high school level, when they're forming their psychological opinions and strengths and so on. Well, there are many other factors, but I want to kind of share this with you because I felt that the school principals knew it, that's important, but an affluent society in the 20854 zip code didn't like to do that. And I said, look, send your children a $10,000 dress after school. Why are you sending, why causing distress? So
Right. Well,
Thanks,
again,
Judy.
kids are so vulnerable, and we know that when you wear uniforms, there's less feelings of inferiority, insecurity, anxiety about kids, because some kids, wealthy kids with all these clothes, will waste enormous amounts of time in the morning deciding what to wear. You know, they think they're going to a fashion show. It's not good for them either.
Yeah. Excuse me, just for one moment, we are beyond
Okay.
about 6 minutes beyond the bottom of the
Okay.
hour. And I want to leave, if people want to continue to ask questions, I want to encourage you to do that. But also if people need to leave, please feel free. And have a great week, everybody. And we will see you next week. But please continue to
Okay.
discussion if Linda's able to.
Yeah, sure. I have a few more minutes.
thank you very much. Linda, if I may, I mean, by bringing it out this, and I raised 3 children, 3 young men in this neighborhood. And I think it's a huge thing that our social scientists like yourselves can really pursue, because America is losing a lot of, I think, children and their energies and possibilities because of the inherent kind of stress caused at school because of this. Children got killed, you know, for expensive pair of sneakers. So,
Well, and again, you know, you might say, well, and being ostracized, it turns out, for adults and children is one of the most traumatic things that can happen. If you're at a workplace and you're consistently left off emails or not invited to meetings, ostracism is painful. And that is one of the ACEs that young people are looking at. They're very sensitive to the effects of ostracism, because in junior high and high school, ostracism is a very powerful way to hurt people. And
exactly.
clothing is one of those ways that they can ostracize. They can make fun of what you're wearing or you don't have. And so you're right on. It's not a minor thing, especially if it's chronic, because you then look at, you know, so somebody made fun that you didn't have the sneakers. But if you grow up every day with people ostracizing you, or you're not invited because you don't have a car, you know, whatever it is, or in second grade, you know, you don't have the fancy widgets for your backpack or whatever it is, it has an effect on you.
Linda, this is fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
we talked
Fun to share.
yesterday when we had coffee with the help of the Jewish Social Service Agency. I straightened my older boy out, and most of that was just his personality as being headstrong and wanting to get better. Do the studies ever get into that, where you follow up on people that have been to the public social service agencies to see how they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I showed you that one graph. I mean, the amazing thing to me, I became a psychologist. I don't know why, because somebody told me I shouldn't be a doctor, and they were probably right on that. But is how much psychology or help, and again, it doesn't have to be professional help. You could have your peers, you could have your neighbors, you could have your relatives help you. But people need help in life. We are not on an island by ourselves.
Yeah.
And when we get that help, that's just how our species is made. The older I get, I realize how powerful that is. I mean, I've always been a very independent person,
Mhm.
and by my nature. And that's why it's interesting. Your son, the next talk I give might be on these temperaments that we're born with, because you could be the best parent in the world and have a kid who's hell on wheels. It's not all parenting. So
That's very interesting, because my other son, his temperament is so not laid back, but he
adaptive.
wants to learn, and he would say to strangers, "I'm level-headed," because my father and I used to talk all the time. Because I would always ask Michael, what do you think of the situation? And he would say, well, you're the father, you ought to know. And
Right.
I'd say, I want to hear your opinion. And I started that when he was 5 years old. What's your opinion of the situation?
Yeah. Well, maybe next year, if I get to give another talk, I'll talk about that.
Oh,
Because it's fascinating. It's a great topic.
This
Thanks,
fascinating.
everybody.